The lion's share of my time in the procurement world has been spent negotiating with people in my own company, being able to listen and understand people's challenges and not being too quick to pass judgment. The assessment centre for that company, you immediately see people diving in, dominating the room, trying to assert control, and I kind of let it play out a little bit and then pick my moment. And I probably always felt that I didn't have the talent that some had, but I probably had the hard work. And so if I could just focus, because I can control that, that's the bit I've just focused on ever since. I used to have someone that worked for me, and I won't say his name here, but he was huge in height, and it looked like he was taking me for a walk, frankly. And then I was his manager. And I think there's other kind of key pillars of high-performing teams. They focus on impact, they focus on activity, they focus on not just being heard, but being seen to be present, seen to caring. It was when we had our second child, and I remember coming back to work after the 2 weeks of paternity leave and got some news, and it was a huge shock for me and for us. There had been a project and a contract that had been in place for probably about 12 to 18 months before I joined this firm, and I could tell from day one when I joined there was a lot of, not animosity, but a lot of frustration. There was not an absence of people trying to pile in to solve it, but it was very confused.
In this podcast series, we're talking to inspiring leaders of procurement and supply chain. Join me as we explore their journey, their achievements, and their career advice. This way, you can integrate them into your career and achieve the same. I'm Marco Marambe, Managing Director at Procurato. Today we are here with Olly Wilkins. Olly is Managing Director at Group Procurement and Property Management at Michael Page. So, Olly, nice to have you here.
Hey, Marco.
Good stuff. So, we'll obviously dive straight into your career and everything at a certain point. But before we do that, it'd be good to get to know who you are. Obviously, I know you well, but, it'd be good to know who you are. So let's start with that. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you came from, and then if your family and friends described you, how would they describe you?
Yeah. So Olly, I was born and bred in the southeast of the UK. How would family and friends describe me? Hopefully fun, energetic. Kind of dedicated, trustworthy. They're the nice things. There's probably lots of other things that they would also say as well, but they're probably the main things. And
how would your friends describe you?
How would my friends describe me? Yeah, I guess sort of friendly, fun to be around. Pretty easygoing, I guess.
Good. Good.
Yeah.
And other things we cannot say here, probably. Right?
Yeah, indeed.
Cool. So if we dive a little bit into your career, want to go through the journey of how you got to where you got to, so that people can get a sense really around how you achieved what you have achieved. And obviously you've been quite successful in your career. So if we start a little bit, cast your mind back to when you first started, how did you get into procurement? Because we all know that, it isn't something that you necessarily aim at 5 years old. You don't go, hey, mommy, he wants to be a fireman. I want to be a procurement leader.
Well, I did. Everyone else at school was dreaming about being a professional footballer, and there I was kind of gazing out the window thinking, can't wait to negotiate contracts.
I bet.
How did I get into it? Good question. I definitely fell into it, like most people. My first kind of exposure to supply chain, I guess, was I did a summer placement at an agrochemicals company. I think it was around kind of 4 to 6 weeks. I was a temp. I think it was during my kind of university summer. And of course, you pitch up and you say, hey, what do you need me to do? And they kind of looked at my skills, saw that I was doing a business IT degree, and said, well, you can support the supply chain team. And so, again, sort of pitched up and said, how can I help you? And they were like, well, we've got a bit of a problem with reporting delays in our supply chain. This is kind of still back in the early days of kind of email, CRM systems. And of course, a bit like the world today, still most of it has been built on Excel.
Yeah.
So back then, I built them a fairly simple Excel-based system that then reported on supply chain delays, and it was automated, so it kicked out emails to all the different kind of functions, and it was global, which was kind of a bit of a head scratcher because I'd just gone in to do a summer placement thinking I'd just be frankly working on a lot of paperwork, and there I was implementing something that had a lasting effect.
Wow.
So that was kind of my first exposure to supply chain. And then it wasn't until finished uni, started a graduate scheme at a management consultancy. And as you approach the last kind of couple of months of your 2-year stint, you're kind of looking for like a home, frankly.
Yeah, of course.
So I've been on a number of projects, and I was on a bid that we were working on at the time for a government department. It was a bid for an ERP system, and I met a lot of people on that bid who were working on the supply chain part of that.
Right.
And I found them really interesting. I found the subject interesting. They seemed like they had got on in their careers. And I thought there was a bit of an opportunity there. And so, I mean, unfortunately, we didn't win the bid, but I made some really good relationships from it. Picked up the phone after and said, "Hey, can I come and work with you and support you?" And yeah, they then sponsored me into their business unit, sponsored me on further training, and yeah, I guess the rest is kind of history from there.
So that's all kind of the back of a trial. You went in there. Like the fact that you had initiative, of course, and you just picked up the phone, contacted them, you decided to do a spreadsheet. Suppose you researched and did all of this yourself. So for those maybe who are watching this and going, right, how do I get into it and what should I be doing in the first few steps? It'd be good to sort of understand a little bit. We're still at that initial stage of your career. What did you do to become good at what you did? Was it a lot of personal research? Did you get a lot of influence, people helping you out? Maybe a mixture of it. It'd be good to understand how you sort of approached your roles at that point in time.
Yeah, I mean, if I think back to when I was at school, I never felt like I was the smartest person in the room, but I felt that I'd always work hard. So I knew that when it came to the workplace, I needed to work hard and I needed to make the most of those opportunities. And so when I got into that consultancy, I could see immediately I was up against some very sharp people. I thought, well, if I can just be a little bit different, whether it's working harder, whether it's being a bit more kind of engaging, perhaps, rather than too technically focused, and just soak everything up like a sponge. I felt like that would be a bit of a unique proposition for me. So I don't think there was tons of research per se, but it was more just reading the room and I guess being a bit different to others, really.
So you're used to soft skills there, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And do you think some of it could have been influenced also by what you were into? Because I know that you're a keen sports person and you enjoyed that. So I'm sure that those skills, because ultimately, when you get into this whole new world of work and you're doing things which are quite, you're in a consultancy firm, you've got to bring in those skills that you've got from outside. Was it things like that which helped you, or was it other things that you relied on?
Yeah, I'd like to think so. I mean, I can still remember the assessment center for that company.
Yeah.
And, you're around a table and they set a kind of exam question, for a problem to solve. And of course, you immediately see people diving in, dominating the room, trying to assert control. And I guess I didn't do that immediately. I kind of let it play out a little bit and then pick my moment. And I think, I don't know whether that worked favorably for me, but I felt like it did.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's better to speak a little bit less, but say the right thing than perhaps put yourself out there too much. I think that worked well for me.
Yeah.
I feel like soft skills perhaps comes a bit easier for me than some of the deep technical side. And perhaps that's less so about procurement. But, if I think back to when I was at university, I was studying business IT. Part of the modules were things like programming. And I knew that I didn't have the same flair that others had for that. But I knew that when it came to engaging with people and I guess problem solving, I could do that. So yeah, it was really just about seizing the opportunity, trying and acting a bit differently, really.
Self-awareness seems to be one of the things that you're sort of talking about. This, you probably didn't call it that at that time. You sort of didn't think about it that way. But it sounds like that skill was relatively important for you to, now if you look at it from hindsight, was really relatively important for you to read the room, understand when you're good at speaking or knowing what to do at the right time? If you look at it from a hindsight point of view, do you feel that it's something that you had to work on, learn about yourself, or you just knew it, it just came naturally and you just sort of read the room basically?
Oh, massively. I mean, some things come to people more naturally than others, but I definitely still had to work at it. I mean, you mentioned sport. Sport definitely helped because, it gave me an opportunity to work in team environments. And I've always enjoyed working in team environments and kind of seeing other people grow with you, alongside you, tackling a common problem. I've always enjoyed that. But equally, you still learn. You learn every day, right? And certainly when you're junior in your career, it can be quite overwhelming. It can be quite scary. I mean, I still remember a few years into my career, I had to go and do a presentation. And I think it was to about 300 odd people at an exhibition. And, of course, I was nervous as hell.
I bet.
And look, I looked very young and fresh-faced.
Yeah,
I don't anymore, but or I'd like to think I do, but I don't. But I remember I was, I was feeling the pressure. And so I kind of went out on stage to all these people thinking, well, they're expecting me to perform. And I say perform as in say something that's meaningful. And I just opened with a bit of a joke. I said, well, I know what you're all thinking. You're here on work experience. And everyone just laughed. And immediately it made me feel more at ease. And then actually it was much easier from that point.
And it's interesting because there's loads of different ways that people can approach those scenarios. One of the biggest, career milestones is to probably present in front of large groups, and yours is probably one that I use as well, around just making a joke or trying to start with something a little bit more funny. Others, one of my past leaders used to put something up on the screen, like a video or something, just to get the mindset thinking. So it's probably one of those things which is really useful, again, in hindsight, to think, how would you approach it? And I'm sure you must have prepared, did a lot of breathing and all the sort of exercise.
Yeah, I mean, preparation, I honestly think preparation most of the time has been one of the key things for me. As I say, I think there's people you meet in your career who can just pitch up and wing it and do stuff. I've never felt like I'm that particular person. So preparation has been a big thing, which has meant, frankly, more time, more dedication, hard work. And then you start to kind of work out the things that you prepare and then deliver that you can see land and then don't land. And then you kind of evolve. So, a lot of it has been trial by error and learning on the job.
And that's a really good point, and actually takes me nicely to the sort of next point. Errors, those things, we like to all think it's a perfect sort of path upwards, but we all know that you kind of grow by mistakes. You actually do. And was there anything which stands out that, you remember, which you go, oh, I would have done that better back then? Think of it. Quite hilarious, probably, moment. I've got loads in my head.
I mean, it's easy because you think about the big clangers, but it's often lots of little things that happen.
Of course.
I remember when I was working on a project and it was a very short project, and my role was doing the spend analysis, so bringing lots of complex data together. Frankly, I'd never done it, or certainly to that scale and in that short space of time. I had little to no direction, and I was floundering, frankly. It was not going well. And I guess, and I would sort of drive home from the project and I'd turn the radio off, because all the way home I'm thinking about it, trying to go, what can I do to solve this? What am I doing wrong? Am I an idiot? And everyone's trusting me, but perhaps they don't see that behind the scenes I'm really kind of struggling to work this out. And in the end, I just put my hand up and kind of said, I need some help here. And I think that's probably been something that, again, I've had the confidence over time to do. If you don't know, kind of ask. I guess there's that bit when you finish university or school or whatever it is, there's sometimes a self-expectation that you've done exams, so you know everything. Well, all kind of school and university doing are preparing you for work. It doesn't give you the answers to everything. And it's okay to sometimes be wrong and make mistakes. So, yeah, I mean, that's an example. I mean, there are plenty of other examples, probably more internally in companies than often externally.
Yeah.
But I can't remember a big clanger like sending out, emails to 200
I'm
people.
sure you've heard stories of those. Or
yeah,
you've been
yeah. I've been on the receiving end of them, and you feel for people.
Yeah,
like, and I often go, well, that's someone's son or daughter. So, try not to be too judgmental.
Yeah, these things can happen. And I feel like, you recover from them according to what you do next as such. So it's fine. But it is, I've heard some horror stories. I've probably made some of those mistakes myself in the beginning part. But so now we're just sort of progressing in your career, and you've now got to a point where you're probably a team lead, or you are actually building on that. How did that part come into play? Like working with other people and trying to actually lead them in a way. How was your first experience in that? And can you recall what it felt like to go into those projects and actually approaching potentially people who may be older than you or may not? So yeah, it'd be good to get to know a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting kind of almost milestone when you start to make that step, because you then realise, well, there's a bit more pressure on me now.
Yeah.
But equally, I think there's a step before it where when you're in teams, you often see people who naturally start to step forward and lead. That doesn't necessarily mean leading as in bossing people about, but more in terms of, right, this is what I think, this is how I think we should approach it. How do we all feel about that? So I guess I'd started to get some experience in that on some projects anyway. Again, you mentioned sport. I mean, sport's a great opportunity to be a leader, even if, again, you're not the formal captain on the pitch. You can assume some of those responsibilities, and then people trust in you. So I guess, again, I felt confident that whilst it was a big step up and I didn't have all the answers, and to your point, I was, younger than some of the people that I was leading, but I felt that they recognised that I was trying to lead them for the right reasons. I'm sure sometimes it felt uncomfortable for them as it did for me, but I'd like to think we approached it sensibly and yeah, I think delivered well out of it.
Yeah, I've had the same issue on my side. You can imagine. I looked younger than I was, and when I was managing teams, it's like, who's this child coming?
Yeah.
Which is always a fun part.
I used to have someone that worked for me, and I won't say his name here, but he was huge in height, and it looked like he was taking me for a walk, frankly. And then I was his manager. But that was all part of the fun and the dynamics of it.
Yeah, and I know someone in common who's also quite tall. And for a stint of time, I was managing as well. Yeah. People were like, "What? Who's this man and this child coming along?" Yeah. So that's
and part of it. You do have to. That was definitely something that I felt I had to overcome.
Yeah,
there was a bit of a fear there of, am I worthy to be in the room? And also earlier on in your career, you're up against people who are from perhaps red brick universities and
great backgrounds.
After a while, you kind of go, whatever, I trust myself. And as long as people trust me, hopefully I'll do okay.
Yeah. And obviously the influence of, higher level people as such, whether it's the managers or the bosses or key senior stakeholders, all those kind of things come into play as well, right? That part of it, once you get out of your head and you're actually delivering something and you realize, now I have to also manage these other people, not only my group and team. How did you find that? Because it can be probably daunting at that point. And we're talking probably around mid-level. You've maybe had a couple of years of experience and now you have to lead some of these projects. So how was that part of it? And what was your approach really to build those relationships with those people?
Yeah, it can feel daunting.
Yeah,
for sure. What did I do? I guess, again, tried to demonstrate from an early point that I was committed, that I had a high kind of care factor for whatever the project or initiative was. Spent a lot of time listening. I mean, I've said this a lot. I feel like there's a lot of people in business that spend a lot of time talking and trying to assert their ideas on others, and I've tried probably to spend more time listening.
Yeah.
And consultancy definitely taught me that. The phrase kind of 2 ears, 1 mouth, and use them in that ratio. And that's what I've probably. I can't remember if I think I was probably told that and taught that early on as part of my kind of coaching. So I've tried to do that, and I think that has helped because. Senior people are often bombarded with lots of points of view from specialists, but also asking them and taking the time to understand what's their priorities, give them options, test their thinking, be assertive, but equally don't be unbending perhaps sometimes, because sometimes the positions and the decisions you want to get to can take some time, and that's probably something I've learned over the years, is not being too eager to resolve an issue or get to my intended kind of endpoint early on. Let it take some time if need be. But yeah, just spending time with people and trying to dial into what's important to them. And listening.
Yeah. So it's an interesting one, because if you look at senior people now, again, at that point in time, you sort of look at it that way, but the reality is, now that you are there yourself, it's normal people who have certain interests as well, and just connecting even at a normal level, I'm sure. And again, knowing you're great at that, and it's one of those things which I'd probably recommend. I assume you would as well. Just it is about the project, yes, it is, but also getting to talk in a normal way, to communicate in a normal way with a person, even if there is a daunting moment. They expect me to talk very professionally about everything. The reality is, I imagine
we're all people.
Agree. Yeah, exactly. And at that point, I'm sure you must have used those skills just to talk about whatever it is, whether it was sports or just connecting with people in a normal sense. And actually, you'll be surprised to know that what they really want to get to understand is, are you capable of doing this thing, but actually want to know you and get that trust, which definitely. I imagine.
And I think consultancy early on in my career afforded me an opportunity where you weren't just typically with people in a meeting or a workshop.
Yeah.
You probably would see them after work in the evening. And so you do get to learn about the person behind the face.
Yeah.
And I mean, okay, that can work both ways, but typically you realise that even if someone's having a bad day or behaving a bit erratically, you recognise then what's perhaps going on and influencing them, whether it's a current challenge or whether it's kind of things that have happened over a number of years. And so it does help make things more
Spending
effective.
Time with them, really.
Yeah. I mean, business is a people business, right? It's you're around people. It's again, like sport, it's a contact sport. So very little can just be achieved by going into a meeting, coming out, or doing a Teams meeting and leaving. You need to spend time with people. So I'd like to think that's helped.
Yeah. And I'd agree totally. It's about using all the time, which is not just doing the work as well, to build those rapport, because it just makes it easy. In fact, someone just talked to me about it yesterday, saying, you're thinking about doing this in the future. Why don't you start building the connections now? Which makes complete sense, because by the time you get to the point where you want to do whatever it is, you've also got a relationship there in place, and then you can show them what you've been working on. So it totally makes sense. And so obviously people who influence your career could be, supporters, could be sponsors, could be mentors. I'm sure you've had a few over a period of time. Tell us a bit about that and how you went about identifying them, how you'd approach them, and what you would do to actually get their support for your career.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the temptation a little bit with mentors is to feel like you've got to go and formalize something, got to go and find a mentor. And that can put a lot of pressure on people, both sides, because, the mentor then might go after a meeting, oh, blimey, I don't want to spend time with him or her again because, that didn't really work for me. So I've never done that. I've more observed people in the workplace and gone, well, I quite like them. I quite like some of the skills and behaviours or maybe some of the career path that they've followed. And then I've kind of spent time with them, really. I think, you join companies typically for people and managers. And so, across almost all the companies I can think of, the managers I've worked for, I've looked up to, respected, and learnt from. But I definitely haven't sought it out kind of formally. And also growing up, you look at people, your parents, and you take kind of traits from them and things that you kind of internalize and look to inspire you, and also kind of other kind of friends and family, and all of that comes together, really. So no one person, but I'd say in every company there's been people I've gone, they've looked out for me, I've enjoyed and relished their input and support at the right time. And sometimes it can just be as simple as booking in a quarterly coffee with agenda.
That's it.
No agenda at all. And actually sometimes they're the conversations where people ask you things that people at work wouldn't ask you.
Exactly.
Because it's a more open and softer environment.
Yeah, that's what my experience has been. In fact, I just remember this one time where I decided I'm going to probably try and seek advice from pretty much the head honcho in the whole department. And I was speaking to my colleagues back then going, I'm going to go and do this. And one particular colleague's like, oh, no, he's too busy. He'll never give you the time. But frankly, just quick chat with him. Yes, okay. He was probably down at the pub, so we were having a good conversation and a laugh there. Probably caught him in the right moment. But he just effectively went, yeah, of course, I'd love to. Yeah, let's have a coffee. Let's have a chat.
Typically, people like helping people, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's
You've got to go a bit flattery, of course, but
yeah. But if you approach someone and say, look, I admire what you're doing.
Yeah.
I've got something that I'd really appreciate your advice and insight into. Typically, people will grant you that time.
100%. Yeah, and I feel the same. It's one of those things which has helped me in my career. I'm sure yours as well, whether it's
Definitely.
a sponsor as well, someone maybe a bit senior of another department which sponsors what you're doing. And that really helps. But all of this comes in, work is important and it leads our lives and lets us achieve a lot of things. But you have to mix in the personal life as well into this. And I'm sure, being a family man yourself, you've had to deal with all that as well and try and balance. And as as you progress with your career, your life progresses as well. And there's different things that you start doing. So were there any difficult moments or things that you had to actually balance into your life? Is there any particular moment that you felt this really, and maybe people don't know this about you, but this really influenced your career and how you managed your career? Is there anything you can share with us?
I mean, I think I always knew that it was going to be hard work going into the workplace, or if I was to get on, I needed to work hard.
Yeah.
So that was kind of never really in question. I was quite happy to do that. But of course, when family comes along, you have to then start to just reframe some of your perspectives and just make sure you can try and make it work. But yeah, I guess a challenging moment for me was when we had our second child, and I remember coming back to work after the 2 weeks of paternity leave and sleepless nights and everything else, watching box sets, and
that's how your
that's how mine went. But I remember coming back, and I came back to work with spring in my step, super happy. And I remember getting a call from my wife my wife, and said, "Look, got some news. Our newborn failed his newborn hearing test," and it was a huge shock for me and for us. And we had to go through further kind of tests, and regrettably he was diagnosed profoundly deaf, and so we quickly had to get our head around it. And of course it was really tricky. It was at the time, it felt sad, and it's weird because you feel sad for something you've never had, but equally it was we were both kind of upset, but we're sort of intensely positive people. Like, okay, what next? What can we do to make this better? And we're fortunate in the country we're born in that he was able to get cochlear implants, which have enabled him now to hear and access sound. He had that operation at 1 year of age, and since then has been able to hear, and his hearing's different to yours and mine. And we often still have kind of challenges,
of course,
but he's doing great, and we've loved the journey. We love him to bits. His elder brother looks after him so well and gives him all the support he needs. But look, that was a challenge that happened to us, and you can let it define you. And I guess it almost reframed why we do work hard and why we want to make the best of the opportunities in front of us, because we want to provide a great opportunity for our children. So tough moment, but equally, we're okay with it.
And from a work point of view, because at that point, obviously, your priority thinking is about your child and all that. But then eventually you get to the point, okay, maybe you've sort of resolved what you can. Did you have any concerns when you went back to work, going, oh, how is this going to influence? Is it going to take me? Because you're an ambitious guy, you were growing in your career, and I'd like to think that most of us want to do something great. And when you're doing these things which really impact you heavily, did you have any fears at that point around how it would impact you as well? Clearly, the first fear that you wanted to settle was the aspect of the health of your second child, but you'd want to. Once you get your head around it, you're then thinking, okay, how is this going to influence?
Yeah, no, I had no fear.
Great.
In part because I knew the company I was working with and are very supportive.
And that's
so that wasn't a concern.
No.
If they weren't, well, I wouldn't have stayed.
Exactly.
But equally, I think, most people recognise that everyone has stuff going on in some way. And are a little bit understanding of that. And so, so work were great about it. But equally, I wasn't worried about it, because I knew that as long as I can work as hard as I can whilst I'm at work, seize opportunities that are there, but equally provide for our family at home and provide a loving, supportive family world, then that would be fine. Work isn't be all and end all.
Of course.
But it's essential. Because it affords opportunities, it pays bills. But I wasn't worried about it.
No, and that's great. And I think what you said there around companies being supportive, that's important to know. They have your back as such, but also managing that path whilst allowing it. You had to probably go to medical appointments, jump out of meetings, do things all the time because your concern was there, and having someone support you that way is great. But it obviously didn't let it slow you down necessarily in your career, so you managed to juggle both things. And I assume it is not one of those where you go, oh yeah, at 9 o'clock I clock in, at 5 o'clock I drop off. I imagine you had to take some time around.
Yeah, I mean, you
working hard at different times to manage all that.
Yeah, I mean, there was the work piece, and then there's, this whole kind of deafness piece was a new world for my wife and I, and so we had to kind of throw ourselves into it. And you talked earlier around, did you research for a role? Well, we've certainly done a lot of reading and speaking to people to draw on perspectives how best to kind of meet these challenges. So back to your point there, we've spent a lot of time outside of work looking at those aspects, but also, working on the day job as well. And so, I've spent many a time late in the evenings, at weekends at times, working. But equally, that's always been a choice. Actually, there's only once, I think, in my career I've had an employer say, I need you to work this weekend. And it was a go live weekend. It was understandable. But since then, it's been of my choice, and my choice because I've wanted to get something done. Frankly, at university, I got my best work done in the early hours of the morning. I didn't want to miss out on the fun stuff in the day. So I compromised sleep to cram everything in, and I've probably done that a little bit since that day. But
went to the pub, then came back and still hit your deadline.
Yeah, whether it was any good, the work, I don't know, but I got it in.
Yeah, of course.
So but hard work is, you don't get anything out of hard work.
No, and it's interesting because, like anything you do, right? Anything you do, even if you're cast back to the whole sort of someone who studies a course or something, whether it's university or later you want to do something else, it's about the effort you put in to get you the outcome that you need. So I can imagine that would have, with all the things you're juggling at that point, it must have been quite an effort. But you've obviously been.
Well, you have a choice, don't you? You can either kind of lean into it and go, well, I'm happy to put the effort in because I think it's going to pay back, or you go, not for me. And I think, you can all think back to people in your career, or maybe back to school or on the sports field, who were some of the most talented people, but the talent hasn't got them to where they should get to because they didn't really have the hard work. And I probably always felt that I didn't have the talent that some had, but I probably had the hard work. And so if I could just focus, because I can control that. So that's the bit I've just focused on ever since. And I think that's worked for me. That doesn't mean that you have to be, a presenteeism type person.
No,
that's not what I'm saying. But I've felt like being someone that's put the hard yards in has definitely helped for me.
Has given you the successes. So you're now progressing to that. You got to a point where you're probably starting to get bigger roles, and you're starting to see a good reaping some really good benefits out of that. How did you approach those big roles? Give us maybe a sense. Once you got that one big role, people are no longer just saying you're running something. They're actually asking you, right, what is it that you're going to do in the next X amount of days to immediately have an impact? So what's your approach normally on big roles? Once you start a big role, what do you immediately do to have the best start?
Yeah, I think, again, it goes back to you've got to kind of understand the landscape. So again, kind of my consulting background schooled me that go in and analyze, and that doesn't mean
sit down with a lot of data.
Yeah, it doesn't have to. I mean, that might be part of it,
Yeah.
but it was really understand the as-is landscape. What's working, what's not, what are people's priorities. And sometimes at the start of a project or a role, you can be led to believe that it's very clear what the objective is, and actually you get in there and you start to see competing objectives. So yes, so phase one has always been understand the as-is, listen, draw on those, but then try and be fairly kind of quick to demonstrate how you're going to try and influence that positively. So what's going to be your plan? So here's what I've found. Here are my perspectives on that. Here's how I think we should tackle it, and come up with a plan. People talk a lot, don't they, about 90-day plans. But I think why that's helpful is it demonstrates early on that you've got a level of grasp and control of the situation. And I think if you don't do that, and you quickly either get into solution mode or just bury yourself in as-is understanding, you don't get anywhere. You get stuck. So I think that's been a key thing for me in any role.
And what would you prioritize? In your case, what do you normally prioritize? What do you go with first? You look at understanding the people's problems, the stakeholders' issues, the departmental issues. What is it that did you start with the issues? Do you start with the strengths? Do you start to understand the team? What do you normally prioritize in your approach?
I think the natural starting place is the person that's hired you.
Yeah. So
you speak to them and you go, what is it that's top of your agenda that you think I and we need to focus on? And ask them similar questions. What do you think's working well that we should do more of? Because human nature often is you focus on the negatives, and it's like, well, actually, if you've got some strengths as a team, well, let's major on those and let's do more of that. So definitely spend time with the manager, then spend time with stakeholders, and again, introduce yourself. Give a bit of a background as to what you're looking to achieve, but give them the space to be open, honest, candid on, what's gone on in the past and what do they think about the future. And I think then you assimilate that and then start to come up with some perspectives. Then you can test with people.
And what's worked for you? Is it always you go and, compute all this in your head, build a nice, your typical expectation is you prepare a nice report ready. This is what I'm going to do.
PowerPoint,
this is what
you're going to say. I can see
it.
it's on the tip of your tongue.
Yeah, I was going to say PowerPoint report, however you want to call it. But yeah, it's, do you normally go with that approach where you prepare something that you want to take everyone through? This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this in the first few months. Or actually it was just, let's just get straight into it. I'm going to speak to the person who hired you at that point and say, look, I'm going to approach these few things. let me come back to you on individually each part and tell you how we sort of progressing on that.
I think you have to a degree, understand how the culture of that organization is. So some organizations kind of expect that formality very early on. Typically, my preference would be to sit down with people, create that space, listen. But then I do tend to then follow up with formalizing something. And most of that, I think, Mark, is because it helps me. It helps me. It challenges my thinking. Because if you can't write it down, you're probably not going to be able to explain it. And if you can't explain it, you're not going to be able to do it. So that's an aid memoir and a help for me. Some people just don't need to do that. But yeah, typically spend time, assimilate the information and come up with a bit of a picture. But again, don't think about it as a deliverable that you're again, like what you produce, you're not trying to get, and I guess consultancy sometimes to degree influence me to try and always get sign off. And probably the learning I've had over time is you create kind of slides, points of view, but it is that, and it might be you take it in and you rehearse a lot of your thinking of how I'm going to influence people that way, but actually what you recognise coming out of it is it went that way, but that way's okay because everyone left the room feeling good. So having that kind of openness that it's something that orientates you towards the right direction, but there might be a slightly different path to get you there, I think is pretty powerful.
Yeah. There must have been some standout moments in that part of your career where you went, right, I've identified this, I've really solved this. Can you give me an example of something that it really stand out, which really gave you the limelight, the success, and actually people noticed that you were doing great work? Is there any sort of standout moment that you felt that was actually quite a good activity that I did?
I mean, there's lots of little things that add up. I mean, I think one I can think about was there had been a project and a contract that had been in place for probably about 12 to 18 months before I joined this firm. And I could tell from day one when I joined that there was a lot of not animosity, but a lot of frustration around
it.
Yeah. And there were lots of reasons why people were frustrated, whether it was costing too much, taking too long, not delivering to expectations. And you could just sense it in every conversation. So, and I remember I think it was day 2 or 3, being dropped into a workshop and with no real kind of firm remit apart from just get in there and see what you think. And again, there was not an absence of people trying to pile in to solve it, but it was very confused. And so early on in my role, I started to exert a little bit of experience of this is what I see, this is what I think we need to do differently. What do you think? And I think sometimes being new gives you that kind of, I mean, it doesn't always, but sometimes it gives you that freedom to go, well, yeah, go for it then, because they've brought you in to make an impact. So the worst thing a company can do is bring you in and then go, don't like what you're saying, just stay in the corner. So for me, I think I helped diagnose some of the issues. I came up with others, not just me. It's never me, because it's always a team piece, but I came up with some perspectives and then we started to work through them quite methodically. And what it bred from people was that we were committed to solving the problem. And even though we hadn't solved it all yet, and we probably still weren't going to erase some of the past where people felt, thoroughly dissatisfied by a certain decision, it made people recognize that, we cared and we wanted to make it better. So that was definitely a project. And that, because the scale of it, because it was global, because it was big numbers, that immediately, I think, made me feel a bit better because I could see a level of contribution. And I think the business saw, okay, he's helping to make things better here.
Yeah, that's great. And those things, as you say, lots of little things, but there's always something which has had that impact, which is good. And as you made a really good point, it's never just you. Nothing in our career is just us, as you know. be good to sort of understand, how do you approach building a good team when you get those type of roles? What's your approach to building a good team? How do you go about it?
Yeah. Well, I guess on that example, probably
Yeah.
another thing to add was, I think part of the view at the time was that this was all a supplier issue.
Yeah.
And you'll see that a lot in procurement. People go, "Hey, Marco, come in and sort this supplier out. They're failing." And 9 times out of 10, it's 6 to 1, half a dozen to the other. Lack of management of supplier, lack of management expectations. Yeah, communicate. I mean, at the heart of most business issues are a failure in communication.
Yeah, 100%.
So on that particular scenario, it was also about resetting expectation internally, and having a bit of a shared problem alongside the vendor and getting some commitment from them. I think going back to how do I kind of breed like a team and a high performing team? I think there's a number of things. I mean, I try, whether I always get it right, I don't know, but I try to give teams space, but equally provide a level of direction, support, coaching, and give them that opportunity to try things. Hopefully they're low cost mistakes. There's nothing wrong with mistake, but let's not make the same high cost mistake too many times.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
But I guess try to identify good talent, and that's not always easy. Good talent who are committed, give them time, space, support, and I think there's other kind of key pillars of high performing teams that if you look around in the business world or sporting world, there's reasons why they do well. They focus on impact, they focus on activity, they focus on not just being heard, but being seen to be present, seen to caring. They're collaborative.
So do you look at it that way from an individual point of view? You look for good talent, or do you also, you might do both, look for the gaps in the team and go, right, I need this kind of people to also join me?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely unhelpful having everyone of the same. Yeah, and certainly the same as you. And that can be quite uncomfortable as well, because, human nature is you end up kind of warming to people who are similar to you.
Yeah.
But often they're the very people that perhaps won't set you up, not you personally, but your team's up for most success. So
you might not see the angles, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And
they bring complementary skills and perspectives. And I've learned a shed load off of the people around me. Hopefully they've also learned from me and through the experiences. But yeah, so in answer to your question, I think you look at the skills, both technical and soft skills that perhaps you think you're missing, and you try and recruit for that. And I think it's important to take the time to find the right person. And because I think it can be quite natural to see a gap in your organization and go, well, that person looks good.
Yeah.
I had a good feeling, but I think it's important that you take the time and really get comfortable. And it's never for sure, but you can work at it in time. But I think it's important to try and recruit a great team, because nothing's achieved individually. I mean, you mentioned success. I don't particularly think I'm super successful, and modesty's been a big thing for me. So I don't like kind of shouting about I've done this and done that. But one thing I will say is
British thing as well, right?
Yeah.
We've all
definitely
grown up with that. Yeah.
But I think one of the key things for me is that everything that has been achieved in the companies I've been in has been because of a strong, high-performing team. And I'd like to think that I've helped create that kind of high-performing team culture and kind of commitment to deliver.
Yeah, great. And, finding the right talent is great. And obviously guiding them through their career is good. So if you were to give some practical points of someone who stepped into a large role, has got all the challenges and has been given all the responsibility, how do you ensure you keep your team engaged? What do you do to do that?
So keeping my team engaged, I think the important thing is they've got to see impact and they've got to see a purpose for what they're doing. So if it feels like menial work and no one really cares, don't be surprised if people then don't really want to lean in to make things happen.
So you're guided partly by them as well in some ways.
Yeah, massive. I mean, everyone wants to, okay, it's great being paid, but everyone also comes to work because you want to go home with a bit of a spring in your step that I've actually made a difference today. So I think people have got to feel like there's a purpose. So what is it I'm doing? Why am I doing it? How am I going to achieve it? They've got a sense that others around them are bought into that and are supportive. So if they feel like your function's just an island and frankly no one cares, and you can have the best leader, but if that leader can't influence people outside and get people bought into the value proposition and actually beyond the value proposition, that hey, this team are a good team, that they're committed, they're nice people to work with, they're going to help us achieve our departmental or strategic aims, they're hugely important. And so I think you've got to foster that culture, because if you don't, it's gonna fail.
Yeah. And so just sort of closing off really, what are the key successful traits you see in someone who's great at doing what we are talking about here, really procurement? And what are the tips you would leave with anyone? These are the things I would do in my career, but these are the things I'd avoid as well.
Look, let's start with the procurement supply chain side, however you want to call it. I think you've always got to think commercial. And by that, people get very fixated on negotiation, price, savings. I think those that have been in procurement a while know it is not just about that. And negotiation, I mean, I was talking to someone the other day that probably the lion's share of my time in the procurement world has been spent negotiating with people in my own company, influencing people that I think we should go down this route, or have we considered this, and aligning people to a certain path, and not just kind of sitting in front of suppliers all the time. But I think having that commercial mindset, smelling danger, as I call it, so understanding if there's a particular deal or a particular project that has a commercial aspect to it, understanding where it could go wrong, how it could go wrong, and making sure that you as that procurement person aren't just a contract person that signs a contract and walks away, but you can see things and help solve some of those inevitable challenges that you'll get in delivery. So I think that's probably one key skill in the procurement world. Another one is, being analytical, but being able to synthesize it into clear and meaningful actions. And thirdly, probably in the procurement piece related to that, is making sure that it's actually practical. I mean, I think there's a lot of people, dare I say, in our industry who will talk about some of the dark arts of procurement negotiation, and you can almost see long papers and theories being written, and you're like, I think we're overcomplicating it here. We do need to think about how we approach something so we don't get lost along the way, for sure. And negotiation teaches you a number of those things around, thinking about alternative positions. So all of that is great, but it needs to be practical, because if you sit in front of people and you're talking about a complex negotiation strategy and contract, you're just going to lose people. I think as a wider bit in terms of what else are good kind of things to think about in the workplace that have served me well, and this is kind of a fairly new phenomenon in the last 10 years, that growth mindset, I think, is hugely valuable.
Yeah.
I've always been a big believer in...
And what do you mean by the growth mindset? Sorry.
Well, so the opposite's the fixed mindset. So the fixed mindset is, I can't improve, I can't learn new skills, I can't get better. My success and my ability to deliver is constrained by where I am now.
Yeah.
Versus the growth mindset, I think it's Carol Dweck, the famous lady who wrote the book about it, it is that all skills are learnable, and our brains are incredibly adaptive. And so if you embrace that mindset of, well, I might not know, but I can go and find out. I mean, children are a great example of that. Does a child ever come out of the womb and jump on a bike? Of course not.
No, yeah.
And some will be more talented and get it straight away. And others, it will take 9 months, a year. but it's learnable, and kids have got that growth mindset, and I think that's a hugely important thing in the workplace. And I think social media creates this perception for many people because you almost compare yourself, you compare careers, and you then start thinking, well, they've got that because they're really talented, and well, I can't be successful. But again, rarely have those people achieved what they've achieved without learning and growing along the way. So I think growth mindset's really important. Being able to listen and understand people's challenges, and not being too quick to pass judgment or perhaps go down a certain course of action. I think it's in the world we live in where everything's instant, social, email. It can be incredibly easy when you get, say, an email. Let's say, I don't know, you're in customer service and you get an email and it's a complaint. The immediate thing could be to find out what the issue is and go and solve it or pacify the customer. And I'm not saying some of those things aren't right, but also sometimes just taking a bit of time, getting the facts straight, and then coming back with the right answer, letting sometimes the sting come out of something is also incredibly helpful. So patience is pretty important too.
Yeah. And a really interesting point there around the trial and, putting yourself out there and actually, expanding your mind by trying skill set. You can learn all these things. I had an example which always sticks in mind, or something that people always say is, if you're in football and there's a goalie who's super good and they go, oh, he's got great reflexes. But the reality is, it's not reflexes. It's just the trial, practice, trying every different thing. So, you've made some of those points before around making, what did you call it? Non-costly mistakes as such. So practicing on those things all brings it nicely to that point and actually gives you the ability to trial different things and learn and become good at it. So nothing is unachievable, effectively, I think is what you're saying there.
Yeah.
It's just go for it.
When I say nothing's not achievable, I mean, equally, can I go on a rocket to the moon? Wow, if I really try, I might get the opportunity. But I think having that mindset of, why not? Why not give it a go? And just recognizing that there's an abundance of opportunity out there.
Yeah.
And so not being limited by either your background of where you've come from, where you've worked, and having that open mindset to try and learn new skills, I think can only help.
I think, as a kind of closing point here, it'd be good for you to maybe just add a bit more context about yourself and just say, if someone were to come and join you and work with you, what are the key things that you feel you'd be able to give someone who maybe wants to work with you, have mentorship from you? What are the key things that you feel you're really good at and you'd help anyone?
Again, don't like this sort of question because it focuses on me a lot. But,
I know.
And it feels like you're bragging or whatever. What do I think? I mean, I think I'd give them time. I'd like to think I'd give them time.
Yeah.
You want, it's a lovely thing seeing someone come in and then being able to evidence 2 or 3 years later that they've gone on to develop, and whether that's in your current company or elsewhere.
Yeah.
So I think I do relish that. I enjoy that. And so I think I'd give time. I think I would be supportive of them if they've got questions. Again, no such thing as a bad question.
Yeah.
I think I would give them some direction as well, because I think, again, it's all very well having the energy and attitude, but you do need direction. If you don't have a level of leadership to keep you within some guardrails, then this kind of unbounding energy can still take people way off track. So I think I'd give some support and direction, hopefully some fun, and opportunity to demonstrate impact.
Great. Thanks, Olly.
Pleasure. Enjoyed it.
Good stuff.
Thanks, Marco.
At Procurato, we work with a number of experts like you who've had a great career and have a great level of expertise and experience that they want to share with us, and we're happy and lucky enough to be able to share with you all. If you feel like you've had a great career yourself, or you've had a fantastic story to share with us, we'd love to hear from you. We're looking for the experts and for the superstars in procurement and be able to get that information, get those stories, and share these with everyone who's following us.